Great, so I'm going to give a bit of an overview about what we know about some self-management programs for people living with HIV. It won't be totally comprehensive, and it's giving it from a lens that I'm particularly interested in and kind of has an Ontario/Canada focus. No competing interests. So just for the 3 key messages, I was asked to organize it this way and I've tried to keep it to it. What do we know? So the first message I wanted to talk about is just that self-management differs from patient education. So when I'm talking about self-management programs, I'm not just talking about trying to convey information. So patient education goals are really about to try and change behaviors by giving people disease-specific or disease-focused knowledge, and the leader of the patient education is usually considered to be the expert in that area. Whereas self-management goals are really about providing participants not just with the knowledge, but also the skills, confidence, and motivation to manage the physical and emotional impacts of living with a chronic condition. Key message number 2, there is a chronic disease self-management program, so called the CDSMP, that works for people across chronic conditions. So I'm not looking at HIV here. There are also many other self-management programs. This is just one that I'm going to speak about a little bit. So what do we know about this? It's called the Stanford Chronic Disease Self-Management Program, CDSMP. So it's licensed and standardized by Stanford. It's 6-week workshops, 2.5 hours per session. They are very highly facilitated. So the content for these workshops is not flexible. It's delivered in a very organized and standardized way by trained peer leaders. So for this particular program, the peer leaders have to be people living with a chronic condition, any chronic condition. They're delivered in small groups, which can be either online or in person. They're grounded in self-efficacy theory, and they try and apply the systemic sort of self-management competencies, so things like problem solving, decision making, how to use and access resources in the community, how to work in partnership with the healthcare providers, and how to set goals, and those are individual goals that the people themselves set during the workshop. There's a fair bit of evidence for this program. It's pretty widely delivered, say, across the US and in other countries as well, with evidence that it improves quality of life, knowledge and self-efficacy. It can improve clinical outcomes for people living with a variety of chronic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, and congestive heart failure. I've never seen it delivered yet among people living, or evaluated among people living with HIV. People who participate in the programs are found to have lower hospitalization rates and emergency department use, and more appropriate follow-up with their healthcare providers. And sometimes that's considered more follow-up, and sometimes it might be considered less follow-up. The reason that our team has been interested in this program is that it's actually very widely delivered without cost across Canada. So the little different colored dots are just some of the different variations on the program, but essentially it's delivered, I think, in every province except Quebec at the moment without cost. Quebec pulled their funding for it over the past year, and it's actually delivered through the organization I work for. Key message number 3, there is a new positive self-management program that we know less about. So this is called the Positive Self-Management Program. It's a direct derivative of the Stanford CDSMP program. It was originally developed in 1997, and I was always a bit nervous about the program because it obviously was started in the very, very early ART era, and so a lot of the focus was on challenges that people would have been experiencing at that time. But it was newly updated in 2016. It's essentially the core program. There's a bit more focus on adherence support, advanced directives, don't totally buy into that, and sex, intimacy, and disclosure. The original program did have some evaluation, not as much as you would expect actually, because I know it has been delivered. So they have found that there's decreased severity of HIV symptoms and decreased self-efficacy for controlling symptoms. So even if you didn't have a change in your symptoms, you might have an increase in your perceived ability to manage it. Sorry, this is like running on its own. People actually were completing the program, so they would join up and complete the full 6 weeks. There were reported improvements in decision-making across a wide variety of health behaviors. They did find greater HIV suppression after 6 months. Some of the studies did not find any change in pain, fatigue, or psychological symptoms. Some studies found that women may not have benefited as much from this program, which is actually different than in most of the other CDS-MP programs. And there was some question about what stage people would most benefit from attending the positive self-management program. But all of this evidence is in the about the 1997 version. To my knowledge, there hasn't been anything published on the newer version. So what is the reach of the HIV-specific chronic disease self-management program? So we know, and we have all the right people in the room, there's a cohort of people living with HIV and affected by HIV who've received the program through the Gilbert Center, and Kelly Leader is here. Just maybe raise your hand. So she's been working on that through a grant with PHAC, and they've trained the people living with HIV to be peer leaders for that program and are looking for opportunities to deliver that more widely. They have growing capacity for the program in that region. Mary had reminded me that McMaster had offered to deliver at one time. I don't feel like it went very far. One of the challenges with this program is that the leaders need to deliver workshops regularly to be considered certified for the program. So, if you don't have anyone to deliver it to or people aren't signing up, then there can be a challenge. I'm supposed to talk about new and emerging issues, so what do we need to know? But before I do, I did just want to mention that this is not obviously the only self-management program for people living with HIV. Gail Rustall did a great review, and the PSMP is in that review, but there are other, more tailored approaches, a huge diversity of options and outcomes that can be measured. Emerging issue number 1, CDS-MP versus PSMP. So and this speaks to a lot of the work that Richard Harding presented this morning, the chronic disease self-management program is really based on the philosophy that people with chronic conditions experience similar challenges that may not be condition specific. And this has come up in the literature, like a lot of the things that people living with HIV live with are similar to the people living with other chronic conditions. Obviously there are some differences, but a lot of the time we're thinking about how to deal with pain, frustration, and fatigue, and that's a key component of the program, how to build exercise routines into your life, how to work on your communication skills with your providers, as well as with people in your life, nutrition, appropriate use of medications, and how to evaluate new treatments as they come up. And those are sort of more conceptual ideas rather than necessarily disease-specific ideas. And we haven't actually compared the chronic disease self-management program with the positive self-management program. As far as I know, no one's ever looked at that. And Sir Cab, who's here from South Riverdale in the back, is going to be looking at delivering the CDS-MP while we wait for the PSMP to get rolling. Emerging issue number 2. What we don't know as well is what is the optimal mode of delivery for these programs, given the content and process are fixed. So keeping in mind that the peer leaders are trained to deliver the program in one way, what are the pieces that we can learn about that might help optimize outcomes for people who would be interested in taking these programs? So where should they be delivered? Rehabilitation settings might be a great option. Should it be at ASOs? But we're hearing that sometimes people don't want to have to identify to attend an ASO. Community health centers, or health centers themselves. When is the best time for people to participate in a program? Should it be someone who has a new diagnosis or someone later? To whom should we be delivering these programs? Does it have to be priorities population specific, or can we mix groups up and offer them more generically? What's the best format? In person? At the moment, in person is the only delivery format for the positive self-management program, I think, in the country, and including, actually I forgot to mention that Manitoba, 9 Circles, is starting to deliver this. Or can it be online? Because the CDS-MP, the Chronic Disease Self-Management Program, is available online and has actually been delivered in Ontario through telehealth. So we can still be in a small group, but accessing it remotely. And then what are the most important outcomes for people living with HIV, for researchers, and for policymakers, but most importantly, for people living with HIV. I found it really frustrating when we submitted a grant on this that wasn't funded, and we were told that we should be looking at biological markers, and I don't think that's an appropriate, necessarily the only appropriate outcome for humans. And then what can we be doing to optimize some of these outcomes, like maybe having additional peer support, or Sir Cab's group is working on potentially health coaching. Should we have alumni sessions where people can come back after they've completed the program, recognizing that your life isn't necessarily changed forever in 6 weeks. This is just a schematic of the program of research we're hoping to put together in this area. So looking at the combination of social learning theory, the chronic care model, and the REAIM implementation science framework to understand all the different components of potentially delivering an intervention like this. I see a photo, so I won't change. And just acknowledging, the many people in this room and outside this room who've made this work possible. Great. Done.